Awesome. We'll get started then. Hi, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Zainab Mohammed, and I am the Community Advocacy Manager for CARE Minnesota. And I will introduce our MC for today, Mohammed Ibrahim, who is with CARE Minnesota and the Deputy Director.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mohammed Ibrahim. Thank you for joining us today for this press conference, which we will be talking about a specific hate crime bill brought forth by Communities Combating Hate Coalition. And before I introduce Karen Moratz with JCA, you will hear testimonies. Just to kind of give you the background, you'll hear testimonies from leaders from the coalition, as well as elected officials. And then at the end, we will open it up for some questions from the press. And to begin, I'd like to introduce Karen Moratz with JCA.
Thank you. My name is Karen Moratz, C-A-R-I-N-M-R-O-T-Z. I'm the Executive Director of Jewish Community Action. And I'm going to say a few words to introduce the Communities Combating Hate Coalition and the bill we're supporting at the state legislature. The Communities Combating Hate Coalition is a group of faith-based, immigrant-led, LGBTQ, and gender advocacy organizations with a common goal: to improve our state's ability to respond to hate and to center and uplift community voices in the way that Minnesota collects data about what's happening here in our backyards. We know that hate has been rising across the country, and here in Minnesota, our communities have been targeted by violence and intimidation. We also know that loopholes in state law and outdated training means that many of these incidents have not been reported accurately or at all, making it hard to form a picture of what's happening and to ultimately generate solutions for the prevention of future attacks. Our groups too often come together following an attack, and this legislation is our opportunity to offer solutions and a proactive plan to strengthen our state's response and to shape policies that will keep us all safer. You'll hear from some of the communities in our coalition in a moment, but first I want to briefly explain what our bill, House File 1691 and Senate File 2003, does. First, it closes a loophole in current law, which bases whether property damage is considered bias motivated on the identity of the property's owner. Many of us have seen racist and anti-Semitic graffiti painted on public schools. Under current law, due to these buildings not being owned by targeted groups, these incidents would not be recorded as part of a picture of hate in Minnesota, in spite of how they may impact the children and staff who walk in and out past them daily. Our bill closes this loophole. Next, we know that law enforcement's training and response to incidents of hate has not been updated in a long time. And we know from conversations with the Post Board that they lack the capacity to update or develop this curriculum. Our bill allows community organizations to create curriculum to be approved by the Post Board and the Department of Human Rights, and we're grateful for their input and collaboration and the conversations we've already begun. Finally, and most important to many of our groups, currently the state only collects data on incidents of hate through law enforcement channels. We know some communities do not feel safe engaging with law enforcement and are therefore far less likely to report an incident, which means there are many stories going untold or unheard that never become part of a bigger picture of what's happening in Minnesota. Our bill opens a channel for community organizations to share the reports we take directly with the Department of Human Rights, which will enable leadership to develop an accurate representation of what communities are experiencing in Minnesota. We want to thank Commissioner Lucero of the Department of Human Rights, Attorney General Ellison, Governor Walz, and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan for their support of our bill and of our communities. It's an honor to work with all of you to keep our communities safer, and this is an absolutely crucial moment for us to come together to do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. And next, we'd like to go ahead and introduce Nick Kaur with the Coalition of Asian American Leaders.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Kaur. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am the Senior Manager of Movement Building at CAL, the Coalition of Asian American Leaders. I speak to you today, 1 week after the devastating murders in Atlanta, where a shooter targeted 3 Asian-owned businesses, killed 8 people, 6 of whom were Asian women. Unfortunately, this act of hate does not stand alone and fits with a pattern we've seen before in history. Here in Minnesota, just as in other parts of the United States, we have seen an increase in attacks and violence directed towards Asian American communities. The latest data shows nearly 4,000 reported incidents of anti-Asian violence nationwide, with women representing over 60% of the cases. Here in Minnesota, we have seen physical and verbal abuse on the streets, at stores and other public places. Just on Friday, a group of Asian parents and students here also experienced hatred when a driver came up to them and told them to leave this country or they would be killed. We've seen intimidation, as with the case of a young couple in Woodbury who came home to a note left on their door telling them to take the virus and go home. And also in Austin, Minnesota, where the words China virus were burned on a family's front lawn. And unfortunately, our children have not been immune to this either, and they too have seen continued anti-Asian harassment and discrimination in schools. We support this bill because it closes loopholes in hate crimes laws, and importantly, it provides support to victims of hate and allows us as community organizations to be co-responders to hate. As a trusted community organization, people are already choosing to come to us rather than police or other government entities. And they come to us because they want to be heard and to be supported. And unfortunately, right now, we don't have the support to play that role. And often what community members report to us is discounted. Our communities are scared, they're worried, and they're asking for help. So we are asking for your help. What happened in Atlanta does not have to happen again. And we have a chance to make sure it never happens. Our communities are in pain, we are hurting, we are scared, and we're looking to our elected officials to take action right now. And so right now we ask for your support and we urge you to pass this bill. We call on our lawmakers to stop hate in Minnesota by passing this community-led piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick. And next, we'd like to go ahead and invite the Executive Director for CARE Minnesota, Jaylani Hussain.
Thank you. This is Jaylani Hussain, the Executive Director of CARE Minnesota. It's an honor to be part of this coalition, and I look forward to having, in this moment, this bill pass. As someone who represents and works hard to advocate for the Muslim community, it has been extremely difficult. For the past 12 years, we have seen hate crimes targeting Muslim community here in the state of Minnesota increase exponentially. We have seen our mosques being bombed. We have seen our businesses being vandalized. And we have seen the threat of violence deny us from having even a conversation about a hate crime, particularly an event that took place in St. Cloud, where the FBI, the St. Paul Police, the St. Cloud Police Department, the Department of Human Rights, the ACLU, were to do a panel. But unfortunately, we could not do that panel because of threats. And that same day, businesses just outside of our office were vandalized. All of this is happening right here in the state of Minnesota and across this country. And for the first time in a long time, the ugly truth of hate was displayed on January 6th, when there were threats to even behead our vice president. Hate is being fueled today by the likes of clickbait news sites like Alpha News and others across the state, demonizing minorities and immigrant population, as well as small hate groups who are oftentimes under the radar. Since January 6th, many people have focused on militias, but the reality is hate is being fueled by many. And therefore, we need to do something. We need solutions, and we need it now. And that is why we are supporting this bill, and we are asking Minnesotans to support this bill, because we need to live in a state where we are all free from fearing that hate could hurt our loved ones, and specifically the most vulnerable of the populations, school children. As we know, in the state of Minnesota, we have seen an increase of bullying, particularly targeting the communities that you're seeing today on this press conference. Particularly in the Muslim community, we have seen leading it to the point where children have no option but to commit suicide.
Thank you so much, Jaylani. Next, I'd like to invite Aisha Mustafa, who is the board chair from African Career Education and Resource.
Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Aisha Mustafa, board chair for African Career Education and Resource. We're excited to support HF 1691 as its existence is important on a historical level to members of the ACER community. All too often, a decision to report biased crimes is judged by people who lack understanding or even guidance in what a hate crime truly is. ACER staff and volunteers have had police called and weaponized against them while organizing within the apartment complexes in low-income communities. The minimization of crimes against those who bully and terrorize, even traumatize members of our society based on such factors as race, skin color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender, gender identity, immigration status, national origin, age, disability must be addressed. The underreporting of these crimes creates a false narrative that everyone is safe in every community when this is not the case. Every person in the state of Minnesota deserves the right to feel protected against the hate. Members of the ASA community fall under those categories, and therefore we are more than deserving of the protection we believe that this supports. It is a God-given right to live free and protected as a human being on this planet. This ensures the right is enforced properly and the full letter of the law, despite historical context to the latter. We call on our lawmakers to stop hate in Minnesota by passing this community-led piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Aisha. Next, I'd like to invite Zainab from RISE.
Hello and salam alaikum everyone. My name is Zainab Abdi and I'm the Civic Engagement Coordinator with RISE. I'm here on behalf of the Reviving the Islamic Sisterhood for Empowerment, or RISE. For decades, the Muslim community in Minnesota has experienced Islamophobia, but in the years since 2016, hate crimes against Muslims have been on the rise. White supremacist rhetoric has led the lost lives, broken communities, and sacred spaces like our mosque being bombed and attacked. Muslim women are more frequently targeted in Islamophobia hate crimes, especially Muslim women who wear the hijab like me. We have seen statistics reporting nearly 70% hate crimes against Muslims are against Muslim women, and those who survive those hate crimes have little to no support from the state when they deserve compensations for their work, lost houses, lost time with their beloved one, and the trauma they have experienced. Survivors of hate crimes deserve justice and support from the state and from all of us. And that's why we are supporting this bill, so we protect all Minnesotans and especially those who are vulnerable. It's time for our legislators to hear the voices of marginalized communities and pass this bill. Our safety should not depend on our faith, the color of our skin, and any of our identities. We call our lawmakers to stop hate in Minnesota by passing this community-led based legislature. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Zainab. Next, we'd like to invite Bethany Bobo, who is the digital organizer for Outfront.
Hi, my name is Bethany Bobo, and I use she and her pronouns. I work with Outfront Minnesota, an LGBTQ plus advocacy organization, and we have an anti-violence program that works with dozens of victims and survivors of hate violence every year. When and if those reports are made to law enforcement, they are typically not documented as hate or biased violence, even when requested by the victims or survivors. We have had so many LGBTQ plus Minnesotans failed by the systems time and time again because they are either not believed or not even given a report in the first place. I want to share a story from one of our anti-violence program advocates that could not be here today. They've said, I have also witnessed horrific ways in which LGBTQ plus victims and survivors of hate violence are re-victimized by law enforcement and other legal systems when attempting to report. One case that will stick with me forever when I was met with Minneapolis Police Department and a transgender woman who had been brutally attacked. The police officer informed her, quote, that if the attack had included sexual assault, which it had, how can that be a hate crime? That clearly means the person was attracted to you, end quote. I wish I could say that case was an anomaly, but it isn't. LGBTQ plus people tell law enforcement the threats that were made, the words that were used, and the physical and or sexual assaults that occurred, and there is no follow-up. I have seen hate crimes, including physical assaults with injuries listed as disorderly conduct, noise complaints, or trespassing. I worked with a transgender woman victim who waited for hours for the police to respond after a violent physical attack while she was walking home, only to be told, quote, well, if you see him again, call us back, end quote, with no report even written down. LGBTQ plus people, especially transgender women of color in this city, are being ignored or written off. It is unacceptable. People are dying. And if there isn't something to address these issues, then LGBTQ plus people will continue to be harmed. And that harm is on the hands of this city and the state. And that's why we support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Bethany. Next, we'd like to invite Representative Samantha Vang.
Thank you. First, I just want to say that before coming here to speak today, I've struggled to piece the words to encompass the pain and loss and hurt that I feel as a Asian woman and what the community is going through. My parents came to America as refugees because of the US involvement in the Vietnam War. I grew up taking care of my siblings while my parents worked to feed us. And I also took care of my parents, helping them navigate through the Western world. Here I am again today, putting myself in between our elders and this racist world we find ourselves in. We should have seen what happened in Atlanta coming. Since the start of the pandemic, there's been a reported rise of violence against Asian Americans, including here in Minnesota. I've heard and seen countless social media stories of our Asian elders attacked at the parks, Asians verbally harassed in the parking lots, and abused in other public spaces. We say to each other, be careful out there, speak English so they know you belong. In a time of a global crisis, we Asian Americans are going through a crisis of our own that can no longer be ignored. For those quick to say that the Atlanta shooting was not a racially motivated attack, well, nothing is more racist than to blame a group of people for your problem and further dehumanize them into sexual objects. This is also parallel to being blamed for and associated with the coronavirus, quote, Chinese virus, unquote, by our exalted leaders who became the turning point, which became the turning point of our anti-Asian hate throughout the pandemic. That goes to show that words matter, and we must call this for what it is, a racist attack on Asian Americans. If we learn from our history, we know that this injustice has happened before. The killing of Vincent Chen, the internment of Japanese Americans in World War II, and one that has been nearly forgotten 150 years ago in 1871, one of our largest lynching massacre in US history is the murder of 18 Chinese men. To change the course of repeating history, you all must say that our pain is not insignificant. For more than a year since the start of the pandemic, we've seen the rise in hate and bias incidents against our Asian American community. And now with 8 people dead, the plight of Asian Americans can no longer be ignored. We can no longer be neglected. We united to protect our elders against COVID-19. Let's do the same for our Asian elders and more against hate. And finally, I want to thank Representative Frank Hornstein, the Governor Tim Walz, and Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, along with community advocates for your support and your leadership and for your voices. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Vang. Next, I'd like to go ahead and invite Governor Tim Walz.
Well, thank you, Mohammed, and Chair Vang, thank you for your leadership. And you have our deepest condolences on the horrific events last week in Atlanta. But you're exactly right. Abhorrent, heartbreaking, but absolutely predictable. And you have been speaking about it. We have been trying to make this case to Minnesotans. And here in Minnesota last week, we had a decorated combat veteran who served this nation honorably, walking his grandchild to school while he is accosted and racial slurs thrown at him. We need to recognize that this is real, that what happened in Atlanta will continue to happen unless we choose to make very proactive measures, whether it is this piece of legislation or having the conversations every opportunity we can, that anytime hate, discrimination, racism, misogyny raises its ugly head, whether it be a rise in anti-Semitism, whether it be a rise in anti-Muslim, or now what we've seen is a horrific rise in attacks on Asian and Pacific Islander community. And you're exactly right, words matter. It, to me, is stunning that we would not hold hearings in the Minnesota Senate to debate this bill that simply does the obvious, that makes it a crime to discriminate against a neighbor for any reason of who they are or their origin, or their religious preferences, or you name it. So I'm grateful for this group This is a group of authentic voices that has risen from the community on many fronts. We know in Minnesota that 2020 made us face things that we maybe didn't want to know about ourselves, but must. And we can be proud of the things we do, but we can be embarrassed and horrified by events like this attack on an Asian man walking his child to school. And so I just want to thank all of you for your activism. I want to tell you how sorry I am that your activism has to gather in spaces like this time and time again, but it is because of you that we make this progress. And I just want to encourage the legislature to take up this piece of legislation that Representative Hornstein, Attorney General Ellison, and Senator Latz have put forward, champions like Chair Vang and her colleagues on here, and all of our partners, to make sure that when we say never again, and when you hear me talk about one Minnesota, that's your Minnesota, that's everybody's Minnesota. And we're here and committed as an administration to strengthening our Human Rights Commission to be able to do what they need to do. We are there to make spaces available, safe space for people to report these crimes. And is our expectation that the legislature put the full force of law behind these as all of us engage in the ability to have these tough conversations with friends, family, neighbors, and those who don't agree with this, to recognize that this cannot stand. And with that, I want to turn it to Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan.
Thanks so much, Governor, and good morning, everyone. It is my honor to be in virtual community with all of you, as much as I miss being in physical space together. During times of grief and struggle, we long to come together, and so the physical distance of this past year has made bearing the challenges of this pandemic even harder. But we must still stand together in whatever way we can. And today we are here to stand in solidarity against violence and white supremacy. In a year of grief, we are mourning yet another loss. The 8 human beings, including 6 Asian women who were shot and killed. This is also a reminder, when we talk about gun violence, we must also talk about racism and misogyny and economic security. After a year of hateful rhetoric towards Asian American Pacific Islanders, this act of violence is devastating. But it is built on a foundation of hate against Asian people and Asian women in particular, and it has deep roots beyond one city or one individual. We have, unfortunately, as the governor mentioned, witnessed instances of that hate here in Minnesota. The legislation put forward by Representative Hornstein and Senator Latz and Attorney General Ellison is a much needed step forward to address the rising incidences of hate crimes against marginalized communities in our state. By organizing, training, data collection, and support services for victims, we can build a better and more responsive system for Minnesotans who've been victimized by hate crimes. But it's also an opportunity to have an honest conversation. Too often when Minnesotans are faced with uncomfortable conversations about race or religion, we turn away because of discomfort, and which I like to call who wants pie moments, when we'd rather talk about food than sit in the work that we need to do. Because it isn't working. We cannot Minnesota nice our way through this moment. We need to name racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, white supremacy, and any form of hate when we see it. So thank you to everyone who is here, who is part of this effort. Minnesota Senate, it's now your turn. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Waltz and Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. Next, we'd like to open it up to the media for any questions. Please feel free to unmute your mics and go one at a time.
Hi, this is Peter with MinnPost. Is Representative Hornstein on the call?
Yes, I am.
Could you just give us a walk through the bill? I think it's on hearing for this week, I saw, and just give us some sense of how you think that is going to progress through the House.
Mr. Callahan, I'm just a little bit delayed. Can we return in a couple of minutes? I need to attend to something here on the floor.
Okay.
I'll be back with you.
Hi, it's Bill Werner at MNN. Is the governor still on the call? I just want to clarify. I assume he's referring to Representative Hornstein's bill. Is that correct, Governor?
Bill, this is Claire with the governor's office. He
Yeah.
had to hop, but you
Yeah,
can email
right.
me or Teddy.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, this is John Croman from KARE 11 News. Does anyone want to discuss just the idea about how law enforcement often doesn't record it as a hate crime or doesn't seem to even have the capacity to mark things down as bias crimes in their reporting process?
Yeah, I'll go ahead for the coalition if that's okay. Yeah, and while we wait for Representative Hornstein, I spoke at the top about what's in the bill and can probably field a couple of questions about that too. Yeah, this comes from conversation with coalition partners in law enforcement and the post board themselves. Their training is decades out of date, and so this bill brings community-led and community-developed curriculum to increase their training to be able to both code and record hate crimes and also to respond to those who have experienced them.
This is Jaylani. I can add. So I've had conversations with actual sheriffs, and I will leave them out of this conversation out of embarrassment, who did not know the basic understandings of a hate crime, who believe that hate crime is only when someone is white versus and someone is black, did not understand the other aspects of the hate crime. And it was shocking to me personally, coming from an actual sheriff of representing a county here in the Twin Cities, to not understand the basic aspects of what a hate crime is. So beyond the investigation, many police officers are just completely unaware. Also, hate crime is not always clearly noticeable in the immediate action. So there's not going to be, not everything is clear as a swastika or a building being burned or a mosque being burned. The investigation required to understand the motive is really important, and it's a lot of times those who are committing hate crimes are more sophisticated, and so therefore we need law enforcement to be properly trained. And I will add one last piece, which is we are now aware that that hate crime is being pushed by enemies of our nation, from Russia to some of our foes who are utilizing social media to radicalize individuals across our state, inciting them to violence. And oftentimes this requires the role of the FBI to stepping in. So we've had this conversation with many police officers as we are part and parcel of helping them understand hate crime cases that a lot of times families or community members reach out to us.
Mr. Hussein, it's Bill Werner at Minnesota News Network. And you might want to comment on this, or maybe other folks. It's a fairly closely allied topic to this, and this has to do with police reform legislation. You probably saw the press release from Senator Latz and others yesterday that they are outlining a number of bills that ought to they feel should have some consideration in this legislative session. Doesn't appear to be much movement on that in the Senate. Do you have any comments on that, just in the context of that? I understand it's not directly perhaps a hate crime, but it's fairly closely allied to it.
Well, a lot of this stuff, thanks, Bill. A lot of this is interconnected, but focusing on this particular bill, this should be clearly a bipartisan support. We saw the ugly nature of what hate can do in this country on January 6th, not only in Washington, D.C., but also on the Capitol steps here in St. Paul. And the threats to the governor and his family were completely despicable. But that's the reality, how hate can immediately become extremely violent and deadly. And that is what we are talking about. So we call upon Senator Gazelka, Speaker Gazelka, to make his promise that he has made to the impacted communities in passing this bill. If we cannot let hate and win, communities across the state are reliant on bills like this to continue to help our community become much more safe. What happened in January 6th, what happened in Atlanta, what happened in Bloomington, all of these are connected. And we need to be able to make sure that we do everything possible to make our communities more safer.
And just so I'm clear, you're speaking of Representative Hornstein's bill, right? That you're calling on.
Yes, yes.
Okay,
yes.
very good. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Callahan and Mr. Warner, I'm back if you have questions specifically about the bill.
Yeah, I think Peter is maybe still on. I think he had asked that you perhaps outline your legislation.
Okay, well, thank you, Bill and Peter. Just to let you know on the timing, there will be a hearing today at 1 o'clock in the Public Safety Committee, chaired by Representative Mariani. And Ms. Maratz, oh boy, looks like another vote. I'm sorry. I will be back with you in a minute.
Do you want me to just tell you the three things that the bill does, Peter?
Yeah, I think that Ms. Maratz can outline what's in the bill, and I'll be back with you in a minute.
Thanks, Representative Hornstein. The bill does three things. First, it closes a loophole. Right now, property damage is only considered bias motivated based on the identity of the property owner. So if there is hateful graffiti spray painted on the side of, for example, a public school, currently that's not coded as bias motivated. Our bill would close this loophole so the content of the property damage is what's crucial, not the owner of the property. It also would add required training in hate crimes response and reporting for law enforcement. That is something that the Post Board has indicated they don't have the capacity to do. So our bill provides for community-led, community-developed curriculum, which would then be approved by the Post Board and the Department of Human Rights together. It also requires them to meet every several years to make sure that the standards are maintained and updated. And the last thing it does is it would open a direct channel between community organizations like ours and the Department of Human Rights, so that an organization like CAL or Outfront or CARE can report the stories and reports that we're taking from our communities, so that those become part of the picture of the data that Minnesota is collecting on bias motivated incidents.
Thanks very much for outlining that. Appreciate it.
I think Henry has a question.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much for hosting this press conference this morning. I do understand that you all have been working on state efforts to reform hate crime legislation. I'm wondering if any of you all have been working on anything related to hate crime legislation at the federal level.
Speaking only for Jewish Community Action, no, we are working statewide currently.
This is Jaylani from CARE. So we have been working with our national organization on hate crime legislation at the federal. A lot of it hasn't been moving anywhere, but there is conversations now to renew those efforts, not only in light of what happened in Atlanta, but I think with the change of administration, it may pass federal bills to strengthen, particularly around hate crimes in the country.
Mr. Callahan and Mr. Warner, I'm back. If hopefully we won't get interrupted this time. Sorry about that.
I think they both, I think they seem to have dropped off, so they must have gotten what they needed.
Okay, sorry about that, folks. Doing a little Zoom multitasking.
Hello, Frank, John Croman from CARE.
Hi, John.
Hi, so law enforcement agencies or organizations basically told you that this is something they can support, that these are kind of reasonable, what they consider reasonable measures?
Oops, can you hear me, John? I'm sorry, you cut out for a second.
I can hear you.
Okay. We have been in contact with the Post Board, and they are, they have a small piece of this bill which involves training, and we have, addressed their concerns. We believe today, they're simply responsible for updating their training curriculum, and we don't have any mandates in terms of their responsibility for developing the curricula. That can be done by others. And so we believe that, law enforcement is comfortable with this. We also understand, if you look at, different, statements by law enforcement, they recognize their key role in, ensuring that our communities feel safe in terms of hate crimes reporting. But again, as Ms. Marat said, people also want to have the option of reporting these crimes through their trusted community organizations. So again, in terms of updating the training manual for the Post Board, we don't believe that's controversial at all with law enforcement.
Thank you.
Any other questions at all?
I have one. This is Martha Vickery with Korean Quarterly. I was wondering whether there is any movement to prevent people from being hired into law enforcement if they've been members of white supremacy groups.
Ms. Vickery, I can take that there is legislation that Representative Frazier has introduced, and I believe it's been heard already. Representative Cedric Frazier, the Vice Chair of the Public Safety Committee, I think he has legislation that addresses that question. And it is an issue.
Representative Hornstein, what is the number of the bill? Do you know?
My bill or Representative Frazier's bill?
Representative Frazier's bill.
I don't have that offhand. I'm sorry. I know it's been introduced and potentially heard. Ours is 1691, the bill that'll be heard this afternoon.
Are there any other questions? All right, well, this concludes the Communities Combating Hate Coalition press conference. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.